Everyone. Thank you for joining us for this month's Accessibility Talks. Each month we get together to learn a little bit about a variety of topics, all related to online accessibility. Please follow us on Twitter, where we are A11yTalks, that's A11yTalks, or visit our new website, A11yTalks.com, to keep apprised of upcoming sessions, speakers, and other relevant information. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel to see past and upcoming talks. And with that YouTube plug, please keep in mind that today's session is currently being not only live streamed, but recorded too. So if you have a sense of humor a little bit like mine, you might want to tuck that back in just for the next hour or so. A11yTalks seeks to provide a friendly, safe environment, so all participants should be able to engage in a productive dialogue. They should be able to share and learn with each other in an atmosphere of mutual respect. So we require all participants to adhere to the Drupal Code of Conduct, even if we're not Drupal specific in our conversations. If you have any questions throughout today's sessions, please go ahead and enter them in the chat or just tag us on Twitter and we'll share those at the end of the talk. So with all of that said, today we are honored by the return of Eric Bailey, who joined us for a panel years ago and is now with us today to discuss if it's interactive, it needs a focus style. You all set to go?
Yeah, I'm great.
Awesome.
Sounded okay? So what I'm going to do now is the little share screen scramble. So bear with me while I set up my deck. It's also really wonderful to be back here. I really like this group, and it's a privilege to be able to speak again. All right, so quick confirmation. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Great. So yeah, just again, just want to say thank you for this opportunity. The name of this talk is If It's Interactive, It Needs a Focus Style. And also thank you as well to the audience for tuning in, either live now or recorded in the future. I really appreciate you taking the time to hear about this subject. So without further ado, let's jump on in. So this is the Mona Lisa by Italian Renaissance painter Leonardo da Vinci. It's a priceless work of art, easily one of the most famous paintings ever created. So two questions I want to ask you here. Is it beautiful? And is it useful? Beautiful? Yes. Da Vinci was a master of his medium. The subject's enigmatic expression has inspired generations of tribute, imitation, parody, and analysis. Useful? From a societal perspective, undoubtedly. However, it's just a wood panel with some paint applied to it. It's fragile, brittle, and it needs a controlled environment and constant conservation efforts. What can we do with that? Not a whole lot. This is a leg splint made by the husband and wife design team, Charles and Ray Eames. They were commissioned by the US Navy during World War II to design a lightweight splint to get wounded soldiers out of the field without causing them additional injuries. You see, the metal splints of that period weren't secure enough to hold the leg still, causing unnecessary traumatic injury and death from things like gangrene, shock, and blood loss. Is it beautiful? I think so. The molding followed the contours of the human leg, giving the splint a flowing organic shape. This molding technique was later used by the Eames to make both sculpture and furniture, including the Eames chair. You might have heard of this. It's a highly coveted piece of designer furniture. But is it useful? Definitely. It's literally saved lives. This is a hammer that you can find at any hardware store. Is it useful? Very much so. Is it beautiful? When viewed through the right lens, definitely. The hammer's bell and neck are elegantly tapered to minimize weight and maximize driving force. And the claw's V-shape makes it so it can pry out nails of many different sizes without the need for special attachments. And the handle is sculpted in such a way that it is both comfortable to grip and slip resistant. Ooh. This is a CSS Declaration of Outline None applied to everything on a website. You see, way back when, many print designers transitioned to web design and brought their biases with them, codifying and perpetuating a lot of bad ideas. This included writing CSS resets that globally removed all outlines because there was the perception that they were ugly when compared to the static layout you get with printed content. And while the web does borrow a lot from print, it isn't print, and we should really stop thinking about it that way. Many people rely on not having outlines removed for reasons we'll get to in a bit. And for the record, I'd also like to point out that many CSS reset authors later recanted their decisions to remove outlines from their resets after learning how important they were for the people who relied on them. Focus styles are commonly thought of as ugly, but that's because we approach it with the wrong mindset. They're an integral part of the web, and we should treat them like such. A good link includes a good focus style to help the people who rely on them to navigate. So what makes a good link? On this slide is Link, the protagonist from the Legend of Zelda game series. And as we all know, Zelda is the boy. So, first what we want to do is write a word, link. That clues us into what we're trying to do. We don't say click here because not everyone clicks things with mice. But the word link is pretty ambiguous when placed in the context of two or more links. So what we want to do is use a word or phrase that describes where activating a link will take you. In the context of a page or view, you can begin to tell a story of where you can go and what you can expect to find when you get there. The text that describes a link is what we call an affordance. Affordances are hints about how something should be used. Think of them as little cheat sheets for operating things, such as the image on this slide, which is the push handle for a door. Another common affordance we use for links is assigning them a color to distinguish them from the surrounding non-link content. Blue is a commonly understood link color because it is the color used by many browsers' fallback style sheets. This external consistency is a quick win for cognitive considerations, as it's one less hurdle to overcome when first learning the ins and outs of how a website or a web app's interface works. But if you don't see color the same way other people do, this may prevent you from determining if text is a link or not. To get around this, we add an underline to help distinguish what a link is. This affordance is as old as the internet itself. Underlines equal links. If we're using a mouse or trackpad, we want feedback to tell us that we've successfully identified the link that we want to activate. This communicates to the user that a cursor has been successfully placed on an area that can be interacted with. Removing the underline on a link when a cursor is hovering over it is a good way to indicate just that. It doesn't rely on just color alone to communicate state change. We also want to have a state that confirms that we've successfully activated the link in question. This reassures the person clicking on the link that something is actually going to happen after clicking it. This is ideal for low-powered devices, low bandwidth, and/or high server load scenarios where it might take some time for the site or device to deliver on your request. But how do we identify a link if we aren't using a cursor or a trackpad? We use a focus style, which is a visual indicator that works much like the hover style. Here, we have successfully identified the link we want to activate via the tab key on a keyboard. The fallback style sheet that ships with every browser includes code for focus styles that appear if none is provided by the author. This is important to note. The deliberate inclusion of focus styles is a recognition by browser manufacturers that people interact with the web content in multiple ways. However, not all fallback browser focus styles are good enough to meet acceptable web content accessibility guidelines criteria for contrast. Firefox, in particular, uses a tiny dotted outline. This might prevent low vision users from being able to perceive which link has been focused on, which isn't great. If someone can't see if something has been identified, it will be tough or impossible for them to know that they can activate it. What we can do is use CSS to overwrite the browser's default focus style and create one that is Web Content Accessibility Guidelines compliant. Here I've turned the dotted outline into a solid blue outline using a color that matches the hyperlink color to visually reinforce the fact that it's a link even further. We could also fill in the background of the link with a blue color and update the text to be white. Now it's even more apparent, and that's great for both biological and environmental low vision conditions. You want to make sure that each of your states is visually distinct and separate from the other states when styling an interactive element. Because each state is discrete, it allows us to more easily understand what's happening to it. Here, I have a hover state, a focus state, an active state, and a visited state. And note that with the visited link state that it may not always be desirable to have it present. It's best to use a visited state when a collection of links are used for task completion, such as viewing training material or navigating through a table of contents. Another thing worth mentioning is the options for styling a visited link are limited. So let's actually pause for a second to talk about that. The options of what properties you can use for visited links is limited due to privacy and security concerns. People used to be able to access your browsing history via JavaScript's window get computed style and other less savory techniques. This near instant process allowed a third party to determine where you had been on the web, oftentimes to the point of de-anonymizing an individual. This is disturbing enough, but it also raises the issue of a complete lack of oversight about what these third parties did with that collected information, and importantly, who they shared it with. Most of you are probably thinking about blackmail for visiting porn sites, but here's another potential threat. What if your insurance raised your rates because you've been searching about some symptoms you've been experiencing, and you conducted those searches with enough frequency that they flag it as the potential onset of a chronic condition that posed a risk to their bottom line? This may seem paranoid, but I remind you that most of us, or at least myself, live in America, where it's a very real thing to think about. All right, moving on. In a pinch, you can use your hover state for your focus state. Combine the two selectors with a comma to save on effort and file size. And if there's one practical thing you take away from this talk, it's that this little hack can go a long way to helping your users out. Links aren't the only interactive element out there either. Here's a button element, another workhorse of the mother user interface. Like links, buttons have discrete states you can style: hover, focus, active, and disabled. You'll note that the button has a disabled state and not a visited one. This is because a button is a trigger for an action and not a destination. Disabling links is technically possible, but it can wreak havoc on assistive technology. It's best not to do it. Here, I'm using the disabled HTML attribute as a CSS selector to control styling, meaning that appearance has been tied semantically to state. It's pretty cool. So poor affordances won't make you rich, by which I mean a lack of affordances might tank your product or open you up to lawsuits. Here's an article on Fast Company about how IKEA adjusts its designs to match cultural norms. Fast Company is in the top 500 most viewed websites of 2018, meaning it gets thousands upon thousands of viewers every day. However, for its current design, links inside of articles don't have sufficient color contrast to make them distinct from the surrounding non-link article text. Here's the first paragraph of the article. Can you tell me where the link is? It's here. In addition to the low amount of color contrast between links and static article content, this link style doesn't have underlines. So we're missing yet another affordance that could have helped us determine if it was interactive. It's important to note that these links fail web content accessibility guidelines criteria solely based on how they look and not their underlying markup. Accessibility is more than just semantic markup, and an automated accessibility checker may not flag this, but it's still a liability and opens you up to lawsuits. It's also bad business. Having poor interactive affordances means chances are good fewer people will click on things. And this is not great if you're making money on things like referral links or pointing to other articles on the site to serve up more ad impressions. Or, say you have a startup and just want people to successfully use your app and not delete it in frustration within the first 5 minutes because they don't know what to do. Or, to put it another way, here's a tweet from Carl Groves. "Nobody has complained before" is a silly excuse for not caring about accessibility. You're right, they didn't complain, they left. So the ClickAway Pound survey, conducted in both 2016 and 2019 to, quote, explore the online shopping experience of people with disabilities and examine the cost to business of ignoring disabled shoppers, discovered that more than 4 million people abandoned a retail website because of the access barriers they found. These people represent $2.17 billion in lost potential revenue. In parallel, the American Institutes for Research determined that there is an estimated $490 billion in disposable income amongst disabled working age adults. Again, those are billions with capital Bs. Startups, all the way to multinational conglomerates, would do well to consider this and think about their approach to digital accessibility. So now we know why it's important to have all our states represented for our links and buttons and how to implement them. On this slide is a knife switch in an open position. But interactive elements on their web aren't just limited to links and buttons. And this system of distinct and discrete visual treatments for state should be applied to anything a person can interact with. These other interactive elements after the anchor element and the button element include the details element, sometimes the object element, depending on how it's used, and then the label element in conjunction with a programmatically associated input, select, or text area element. And these all represent the basic building blocks of any modern, robust design system. So it's important to consider them as you build out such initiatives. You also want to make sure that your focus styles work for links that wrap non-text content, including things like images. Of course, don't forget to provide alternate descriptions for those of us who may not be able to view your content. Here's a puppy in a flower pot. But we can do a little bit better than that. Here's an updated alternate description. A happy-looking St. Bernard puppy resting his paw on the lid of a clay flower pot he's been placed inside of. His tongue is hanging out, and he is looking straight at the camera. The flower pot is placed in front of a flowering yellow plant on a bright spring day. If we want to create equal and inclusive products, we can provide a little more detail in our alternate descriptions to match the quality of information and experience a more abled person may be experiencing. This image is being intentionally placed. It is the focal point of this slide. We want the reason why it has been placed there communicated, regardless of how you access it. And it's a myth that styling focus states is limited to just the outline property. In fact, you have the full range of CSS to work with. Just make sure that when a state is styled, it is done so in such a way that it does not shift the page's layout around when activated. This is disorienting and can make a person lose their place. I like to use properties that won't cause the browser to recalculate box sizes, such as color, background, and box shadow. And speaking of box shadows, one technique I especially like is using stacked box shadows to create a ring around an element that will honor its border radius if present. Here with the box shadow, I have two rings, one with the background color and one with focus color. And that creates the kind of ring effect by cheating the background on the background the button's actually placed on. And you'll notice that I'm removing the outline to get this effect. This is a situation where it can be acceptable to remove an outline so long as the focus style you replace it with is distinct and passes WCAG color contrast criteria. However, people experiencing low vision conditions may use Windows high contrast mode to help them read. So it's good to check out our styled states to see if they hold up. High contrast mode will strip away a lot of CSS to do what it does, including box shadow. So here, to get around this, I've used a high contrast media query to tweak the focus style to fill in the button instead. So now we have a media query that when high contrast mode is active, the background color turns to button face and the color turns to window, which are two color keywords that dynamically update based on the colors chosen in the high contrast theme. And this could be helpful for people who are magnifying their screen, as well as the focused effect is more pronounced and therefore easier to perceive. Alternate ways to identify and activate content aren't just limited to keyboards. This is a switch, which helps some people with motor control issues operate technology. They're typically large hardware buttons that you can program to do different things. And this is neither a mouse nor a keyboard interaction. It's binary input that may emulate other kinds of input. The next slide we're looking at has a full screen animation. So if you are motion sensitive, please consider looking away while I describe it. I'll be changing slides now. Focus styles aren't limited to just assistive technology users. Here, I'm using the Apple TV remote to identify the tile I want to activate. And it's worth pointing out that this is a luxury piece of mainstream consumer technology and not specialized assistive equipment. Okay, you can look back now if you were looking away, thank you. And we're on to the next slide. We're not just limited to the focus selector anymore. The W3C has two new CSS properties regarding focus for us to play with. There's Focus Within and Focusvisible. This slide's photo is a statue of the Buddha. Focus Within is a pseudo class that is activated when an element is focused or contains an element that is focused. Currently, the most recent versions of Firefox, Chrome, and Safari support it. And this is a screenshot from Can I Use showing the support table for this property. And speaking of tables, a practical example of how we could use it could be for a table whose cells contain links. With Focus Within, I'm able to highlight an entire table row when a link in one of its table cells has received focus. This is done entirely with CSS, something you could previously only accomplish with the help of JavaScript. Here's how it works. We're looking at the table represented as a hierarchical tree in the document object model, or DOM for short. Focus Within is declared on a parent node to the one that will receive focus events. In our example, that's a table row. When a focus event occurs on the link inside of a table cell, the event travels up the DOM tree until it hits the element that has Focus Within declared on it. Styling rules are then applied as the conditions required by Focus Within have been met. Note that if the browser does not support this selector and it is included in a list of other valid selectors, the entire group declaration will be ignored. So, be sure to author your CSS with care and discretion. On this slide is a tweet by Keith J. Grant illustrating just that. Next, we're going to talk about other people's opinions regarding focus styles and what you can do about them. Sometimes you're being a good ally and have a strong case for incorporating focus states into your site. But a less informed person can override you because they have more organizational clout. So what can we do about that? On this slide is Michael Scott, the boss from the TV show The Office, in my opinion, one of the greatest villains in all of modern media. One thing we can do is sneak those focus styles in using Focusvisible. Focusvisible is a pseudo class that is activated when an element is focused and a user agent determines via heuristics the user's input modality. Whew, that's a fancy way of saying it shows focus styling when activated via input other than mouse cursor or finger tap. So, say you have a link on a website and a person decides it's interesting and wants to visit it. They identify the link. If Focusvisible is declared on it, the browser runs a bunch of logic to figure out what input the person is using. This allows us to create separate focus styles, one for cursor input and one for keyboard input. This allows us to create two separate modes for your website, one that is shown to mouse or trackpad users, and one that is for everybody else. Currently, only Firefox supports it, as shown by this screenshot from Can I Use? But we can get other browsers supporting it by using a polyfill, which is a technique that uses JavaScript to recreate a browser feature. But in addition to the extra data to download and maintenance concerns that come with introducing a polyfill, I'd like you to consider this. Can you trust your heuristics? I mean skeptical. Computers are awful, absolutely awful at understanding the context of the real world. Here's Google's world-class algorithm having trouble telling the difference between dogs and fried chicken, as an example. The web, you see, is more than just mice and keyboards. We're seeing more and more devices with multimodal inputs becoming commonplace, meaning that a person might be switching input on the fly to best accomplish the task at hand. For example, someone using the Microsoft Surface may at any point be using a mouse, a trackpad, touch, keyboard, stylus, gesture, or voice inputs. Form factor is also an unreliable metric, so device sniffing is out. For example, here's a Gemini PDA, which is a clamshell Android smartphone with a QWERTY keyboard. And devices may also have their input augmented. The latest screen reader survey by WebAIM revealed that a total of 62.3% of all participants use an external keyboard in conjunction with their mobile device in some capacity. This especially should give us pause for concern about making assumptions about how people actually use their devices. So now let's talk about people. I have a lot of problems identifying people as assistive technology users without their express consent. I think the general idea behind Focusvisible is well-intentioned, but ultimately may be a slippery slope solution. The specific concerns I have aren't new, nor are they exclusive to just me. For starters, if you spent any amount of time doing web development, you know that creating and supporting solutions based on detecting what the browser reports is an unsustainable nightmare. There's also the collecting and sharing of personally identifying information. Focus Within can be used as a hook to try and identify people as an assistive technology user. This is analogous to issues with the visited link described earlier, only now we live in the future and mass data breaches are commonplace occurrences, meaning that this deeply personal information collected about you without your consent is even more insecure. Another big picture concern is if you don't check to see if your design solutions actually work the way you intended with the people you're designing for. This unpredictable state change has been reported to be confusing for low vision and less technologically literate users, the very kinds of people this property was supposedly created for. It breaks the mental model of how they think of these very basic core interactive elements are supposed to function, a fact which really demonstrates the importance of testing the things you make with the people they're actually intended for. Finally, this line of thinking is starting to creep back into a terrible trend of the early web, which was separate sites for assistive technology users. These sites didn't always have the parity in information or capability compared to the sites that were supposed to accompany, and often forced the people using them to contact support if they needed assistance, which is an embarrassing act that diminishes personal autonomy. There's a reason you don't see these kinds of sites that much anymore, and that's because they just don't work. In fact, Scandinavian Airlines was just fined millions of dollars by the US Department of Transportation for this very thing. People also are not binary about their skill in operating websites. Here's a graph with two axes arranged in a cross shape. The x-axes are labeled completely unfamiliar and expert, and the y-axis is labeled fully able and severely impaired. When I'm healthy and working on my personal laptop, I can use Google Docs with ease. Here, I've placed an icon for Google Docs up in the top rightmost quadrant of fully able and expert. Or maybe I'm reading about a virtual meetup group I have some familiarity with, but want more information on. Here, the A11yTalks, Accessibility Talks icon has been placed a little bit to the left of Google Docs. They have a new website. It was fun to check out. But I'm not that smart, so I'm going to have some difficulty learning about differential calculus on Khan Academy. Here, the icon for Khan Academy is up high with fully able, but placed very close to the left near completely unfamiliar. Or maybe, quarantine is past us, and hopefully I'm traveling in a foreign country and need to get some kind of critical information. Here's the icon for the Moscow Metro. But I don't speak the language, have a limited data plan, and I'm jet lagged and sick from the long flight. And here, Moscow Metro has been placed closer down to severely impaired and moreover towards completely unfamiliar. Or maybe I'll just get old. Another way to put this, I tab through forums all the time. Am I disabled? Am I an assistive technology user? Really, it's not about what a system identifies me as. It's about how well a system responds to who I am and what I experience when I use it. Because of this, what I'm asking you to do is embrace the unknown. On this slide is a picture of Hank Hill being embraced by John Redcorn. Hank has a very uncomfortable expression on his face, and King of the Hill is a sorely underappreciated show if you've never seen it. Focus styles are so baked into what the web is that we don't even consider it a unique standalone feature. If you're going to make a browser for mass consumption, it's simply just part of the table stakes. Here we have a can I use support table for CSS 2.1 selectors, including focus. It doesn't even make the distinction of that property. And it is green across the board for every single browser. We're not always using the latest device or the latest version of a browser. This is a $30 smartphone from Walmart. And if you're economically disadvantaged, unhoused, or live in an emerging market, you simply may not have access to a device capable of taking advantage of the latest technology. The Geo smartphone, for example, is a low-power, internet-capable device that is incredibly popular in India. In fact, some people specifically purchase and use devices that are no longer supported because of the fact that it makes it affordable. This is, for example, the now defunct Windows smartphone. These groups of users collectively represent millions of people, many of whom have never used the internet before. Should we turn our backs on them because of it? Browsers are eating the world, and we're going to keep finding them in places we never thought they'd be. Here's developer Drew McLean discovering that his new car has a browser built into it. In his tweet, it says, just discovered that my new car has a web browser and apps with a little photo of the web browser app. So in closing, it's important to keep the following in mind. Good user experiences meet people where they are, not where we hope they'll be. Thank you for your time, for tuning in, and to the Accessibility Talks group for setting this up. Thank you to the transcriptions that will be written for this recording. And thank you for everyone for tuning in today. Again, I really appreciate you taking the time. If you want to reach out, copies of this deck are available unnoticed, as well as on my website and at Twitter at Eric W. Bailey. Looking forward to chatting.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric. This has been great. I have a couple of questions here, and I know we have a couple of questions incoming. One question was the alt tags. You mentioned something about having a much more descriptive experience. How long do you feel that that should be? Is there kind of a cap to that?
Yeah, generally speaking, I think it should be, short and succinct. But my thinking, and if anybody has any input to the contrary, if you have a very editorial experience with only one large image, that image is there to describe something important. So it may be worth a little bit of, a couple extra adjectives or maybe an additional sentence. But definitely when you're writing your alternate descriptions, don't put the complete works of Shakespeare into every single image. You want to really communicate the intent of why it's there and what's inside the image.
Know thine image's value. Gotcha.
Love it.
All right. So Mike Herschel wrote, how consistent should focus styles be across your site? In your opinion, is it acceptable to have visually different focus styles for links in the primary navigation versus the body text versus the sidebar and so on?
Oh, that's a cool question. I don't know. I'd say that's something to research, especially with lower technologically literate users. I will say I like the idea of a consistent experience across the site, because the more it doesn't shift, the more you're not questioning why it's changed, and the more it'll match your expectations for behavior. That being said, unfortunately, focus styling is not very commonplace on the internet these days, so I'm just happy to see it at all. And then even within that, consistently applied within the same area.
Awesome. Are there any particularly common pitfalls that you've seen that we should definitely keep our eyes out to avoid?
For focus styles, the layout shifting is one of them. It's like a good example is like if you change a font to be bold, when it's focused, it'll actually increase the width of the font a little bit, which will knock things around. And if you have a link in a body paragraph, might cause the whole body paragraph to reflow a little bit, which is very distracting and annoying and confusing. The other thing I think for common pitfalls is frankly just opposition because of perceived aesthetics. So I'm a designer, and a lot of designers have this bias where it's ugly, ew, I don't want it, and they just don't understand the importance of it. So it's one of those things where, like, if at all possible, having a conversation with them to explain the importance of it, or better yet, if you can get a recording of one of your users using focus states and they can understand exactly how important they are. Those are really powerful and important things you can do.
Fantastic. Just a mention of a comment. It was kind of a follow-up to our question about consistency. Homer mentioned they just did an overhaul of their focus rings and made them uniform across all platforms.
Awesome. Yeah, I saw on Twitter. I'm so excited. You should totally write up about that because I'd love to read it.
Awesome. And so feel free to tag us and Eric on a tweet about that. We'd love to see more. Just double checking if there are any other pieces. Question. In an ideal world, would you prefer authors to use the default browser focus style for consistency if browsers were to make a visible default? Or would you still want a custom focus state?
Right now, I don't think browsers do a good enough job with focus states. They're getting better. I know Chrome and I believe Edge have done some good work around this area, and I believe Firefox is investigating it as well. That being said, I think this is an opportunity for a designer to really flex their muscles in terms of like a good mature design system to make it feel like a natural part of the website experience. And I also think that browsers should have the ability to override focus styles from an authoring perspective. I think this is functionality that's been missing for a while now, but basically the same way you can adjust the font size in the browser, you should be able to say override declarations of focus and use a browser one. And that creates the internal consistency if you need it, as well as overrides somebody who has decided to override focus styles and reinstitutes them at a level that the site can't do anything about, because ultimately browsers are there to help users navigate, and this is a really important way to do just that.
Awesome. Another question was, do you think CSS Media Queries will include focus styles in the future? Or what is the future of focus styles?
I hope not. As much as possible, I think they should be presented as a non-negotiable thing. I think create like a media query for the presence of focus styles starts to get into that separate experience for different ways of using things problem, and I'd ideally like to avoid it. Another thing is CSS is just candidly very underappreciated and underutilized. So a lot of these newer feature query media queries like reduce motion, for example, are just never used.
All right, couple more questions. Ashley asked, with Firefox's default focus styling being so terrible, is it that Firefox just isn't aware of how bad their default is, or are they just obstinate about improving their focus indicator?
That's a great question. I have no idea. I will say they've been very receptive. As a disclaimer, I really like Mozilla. I like their mission. I use Firefox as my main browser. And it seems as of late, they've been very receptive to a lot of accessibility related concerns where historically they may not have been. I know that they're doing a lot of work to get it compatible with screen readers, as well as their developer tools have exposed the ability to expect the accessible computed names of things, which is amazing. I use it all the time. That being said, browsers are really complicated under the hood, and I have no idea how hard it is to change something like this. But I do like that they are making forward progress on it.
Awesome. Focus weight for administrative focus or user focus in the same editorial page. Which one is more important?
Focus weight or?
Focus weight for administrative focus or user focus in the same editorial page. Which is more important?
I guess I don't understand the
Yeah,
question.
Raheem, are you able to write us a little bit more there? I'd love to hear more. I'm going to move on to the next question, but please go ahead and elaborate a little for us.
Yeah, I apologize.
No, that's all good. Mike, what are your thoughts on high contrast media queries?
I like them. I have a talk about them. Um, High contrast is the last best hope for a low vision user to use the web or to use a computer. I like that it is incredibly aggressive about how it updates visuals. I like that you're incredibly restricted for what you can do as an author. I like the deep pairing with semantic markup. So basically, if you write a link using an anchor element, it'll look the right way in high contrast mode. If you write it using a div with an on click, it'll look like garbage because, and there's a nice purity in that like, if you do it the right way and you work with the grain of the web, it just works, and you don't have to create more work for yourself, which appeals to me. And
Mike is following up with, but you disagreed with other accessible media queries.
well, it's already there. And I mean, if you are trying to play gotcha journalism, got me. It's more knowing what's out there and how to best use it.
Okay.
I'm skeptical about adoption, and I wish we as an industry were better about championing these kinds of concerns outside of accessibility circles.
Very, very valid point. Let's see, it would be redundant or non-contrasting enough to add focus styles if some screen readers have its own options like Chromebox. What would you suggest?
I mean, assistive technology is more than just screen readers.
I agree. All right, so we have a little more detail on the original question we were confused by. So if you were editing the layout of a page or editing a page, what would be more?
Oh, is this in the
Yeah,
context of like
the
a
focus.
CMS with a live view?
Yeah, I was gonna ask, is this like an in-page editing? I'm not. Let me just write in the chat.
Yeah. I guess where I'm jumping to is like if you're in Gutenberg, say, WordPress's editor, and like you're tab shifting around to update the content, should it look like the actual content that it will be, or should it be like you're in an editing mode inside of Gutenberg? Maybe that's my best guess.
Yes.
Okay,
We
cool.
just got confirmation.
Awesome. I hadn't really ever thought of that before. I mode switching is really thorny. And just kind of shooting from the hip here, I'd say like you probably want a differentiation between the CMS and the content it outputs, just to kind of help you understand where you're at. That being said, I'm going to dodge the question a little bit and say test with the people who use it.
Totally legitimate. These are a lot of really awesome questions, but they're also a little hard. And I think we may need to go back and research, but we always encourage you to tag us on Twitter, get this conversation going, and we can definitely just continue it long after this keeps going.
Yeah, these are great. I really appreciate these questions, and I don't really get an opportunity to talk about them a lot. So I really appreciate everyone for asking them.
Yeah, I think we have only one or two more here. Lauren is asking, as someone who's just starting to learn HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, what would you recommend to understand and build a good base for creating accessible content other than the WCAG guidelines?
Oh, wow. That's really cool. Congratulations on getting started with this, first of all. There's a lot to learn. So I really appreciate you, considering accessibility. If you're looking for kind of something less dense than the WCAG, if I can plug something for a second, I help maintain the A11y project, which has a checklist, which is kind of a very high level thing you can go through to check a lot of your content for different accessibility considerations. And I believe there's another site that just came out, ally.coffee, and again, it's a very high level kind of things to think about. Um, Another really great tool that I recommend is getting an extension such as DQ's Axe, which will scan the page that you're looking at for common programmatically detectable accessibility issues. And what I really like about that is, in addition to it flagging the issue, it also has a link where you can kind of learn more detail about why it's an issue, including the use case of the person who would be affected by it. And I think that's a really good empathy building tool, and I learned a lot from it.
And to build off of that, segues perfectly. A question about user testing. Can you tell us a little about, where to look for it, how to source it, what are your experiences? Just a mini guide here.
Sure.
No pressure.
So we were actually just talking about this in the pre-show. I'm a designer by trade, and I do a lot of user testing. Um, you can do it on the cheap. You can ask your friends and your friends of friends. Just go like, hey, do you have 10 minutes? You want to check this out? I like that because it's, a pretty quick and easy way to do it. I also think it's important to source disabled users for user testing. So services like Fable Tech Labs, Pearson, what was the one you mentioned you were using?
Oh, actually Carrie did that.
Oh,
So she could either sneak that information over.
yeah.
I cannot remember the name. Knowability.
Knowability, yes.
Ability.
And then there's a list I can get you afterwards. But basically the idea is like, do your due diligence, test with a wide range of economic, social backgrounds, geographic locations, gender, religion, the whole gamut, just to make sure that, when you are putting something out there for the world to use, you are doing your due diligence with making sure that the whole world can use it.
Fantastic. Yeah. I mean, we all put so much work into everything we're building, whether it be from the development point of view or the writing point of view for the content or what have you. It's a shame to do that much work and not have it digestible by the world. Yeah. So with that, thank you so much, Eric, for joining us today. You've been absolutely fantastic. And thank you so much. Thank you, everyone who joined us. Thank you for that lively discussion. This is great. If you have any follow-up questions, again, tag us on Twitter, let us know, reach out to us. We're happy to keep these conversations going long after the webinar is over. If you're watching along later, don't feel shy, go ahead and tag us then. And hey, we have a pretty good schedule lined up, so definitely keep involved, but there is room for 1 or 2 more speakers. So if you're interested, reach out to us, let us know. We'd love to hear your thoughts and have you share your expertise. All right. So with that, have a fantastic day, everybody. And thank you again, Eric.
Thank you.
Bye now.